Welcome back to another episode of Dreams, Sovereignty, and Wise Women Ways. This is Marisa Goudy, and as ever, I am joined by Pearl Gregor. Pearl is the author of three books, including I, the Woman Planted a Tree, and I am the author of The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. In this episode, we're talking about birth. We're talking about our own birth stories. We're talking about what it means to birth the divine feminine. But we begin in a cave. Perhaps one might say that the cave is the birthplace of humanity in so many ways. It's certainly the birthplace of myth. Let's begin.
You're talking about a time you're actually in Ireland. You have your daughter with you, but this is what you've said. I wasn't necessarily thinking of the sovereignty knot archetypes at this moment. By entering this cave, I was simply coming into a new, true relationship with myself, with the Great Mother, and with the entirety of the earth. I was shedding my obsession with the world of light and seeing that this was the true birthplace of my spirit and my feminine nature. And I was doing it while being somebody's mom. Will you pause with me a moment and savor the true birthplace of my spirit and my feminine nature? So I'm going to take you now to Bingen, Germany. And an experience I had while I was there in September 2018, I do believe. I was there on pilgrimage with the Abbey of the Arts. It's Hildegarde's 920th birthday. And we've been to her church, and we've been to her museum, and we've been to where her small anchorage was, and we've been all over the place. And that day, there's a high mass being celebrated in the church at Rudersheim. I'm pretty sure that's the right name. And I'm standing on the side steps watching as the procession comes around the corner, red and white, all male priests and acolytes. And then I look, and there's a dove. It lands on the steeple across quite 300, 400 yards away. And I watch that for a second. And then I watch in complete a trance as the earth opens up and it rolls back. I don't even have quite the right words, but it literally rolls back the sides of the earth, and out of the earth walk a procession of nuns, Benedictine nuns, their hands folded demurely in their habit, as they're wont to do, stick one hand, inside. And they process very right up behind the red and white male procession, up the stairs and into the church, and sit in the front pews. Of course, they're invisible, except to me. I'm looking around and thinking, does anybody see this? Have I lost my mind? And then I'm reading your book. Of course, it's 3 years later. And you're talking about the cave and the feminine spirit. And you say, once deep into her belly, page 49, and past the muddiest bits, you could pause and recognize you were inside some sort of primeval cathedral. This passageway was much wider than the span of your arms, and the walls of this triangular cave met nearly 20 feet above. At the far end, about 60 feet in, there's another sacred V, a private cleft that mirrors the entrance above the ground. If you're thinking of the labia and the cervix tucked deep within the tunnel of the vagina, you are imagining it right. And that took me to my own drawing. I don't know if the readers or listeners can see it. I'll show you as much as I can. I did this in an art therapy group where we just drew. Now, I looked at it, but then with that group of women, I put it down on the ground, on the floor of the room we were meeting in. And the women were standing around over top. So they're looking down. And they say to me, sort of like a little bit hesitant, Pearl, it's a birth canal.
Mm.
It's a vaginal birth canal.
Mm-hmm.
And I look and I see, indeed it is.
Mm.
And so was the earth that day. That day, the earth rolled back and rebirthed the divine feminine out of itself. I was so struck by that. Yeah. And I think that's what when you talk about the vulture and the dark days and all of these kinds of events that are occurring, climate change, and I think we are rebirthing, and birth is never easy. What did you say? You said it a few sentences later. I'm not entirely sure I'll find it very quickly, but birth is very slow. It's a very slow process.
Yeah.
You know, and it's messy.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's pretty traumatic, as my birth that came through in the Reiki session. Mm. And birthing yourself is excruciatingly difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I laugh when you say birth is slow, because I'm thinking back to my birth of my second daughter, and our midwives, I gave birth to both girls at home, our midwife, and it was the Super Bowl. And it was a very boring game. And it was also Imbolc. It was Bridget's Day. And I was desperate to have this baby on 2/2 on February 2nd. And so I was like, all right, the game is boring. We could do this before midnight. Let's do it. And the midwives texted back, and of course it's a snowstorm. And the midwives, they're like, well, this is a section that we remind you, laboring is also called laboring, and you are not going to have this baby yet for a while. Sit tight, watch the game. We'll be there sometime after the halftime show.
Birth can be very slow.
Laboring.
Did she laboring? Did she make it on the 2nd of February?
She did not. She was born at 2:30. Well, she was born on the 2nd of February. Nope.
Somewhere
on the West Coast. Not quite for you. It was 2:31 a.m. Eastern on February 3rd.
Yeah. Nope. Didn't make it here either.
No. But the West Coast, there was, in Victoria, she would have been.
She would have made it.
Yeah.
Yes, but, indeed, she would have.
What I keep flashing to as you're mentioning the deep difficulty of your first birth, and I remember my first birth, of course, so vividly in so many ways, and that long and long and long. I remember my midwife again saying, "You got to get out of your head if you ever want to have this baby." And I said, I've tried to learn this lesson every day for 30 years, but I still remember that visceral rush of that moment she slid free.
Oh my, yeah,
right?
Yeah,
that feeling is such a gift to every mother who gets to give vaginal birth. Yeah, and all that pain and agony.
And if indeed it is not, I mean, I was not present in that sense for my eldest son's birth. It was seriously far too traumatic to this and that. I don't need all the details. The second child was born in his dad. They told his dad to go back to the office and not to worry about it until later in the evening. And about 10 minutes later, I pressed the little bell and said to the nurse, "You better check, because this baby's not waiting for evening, regardless of what anyone else is thinking." She took one look, and there was a great flurry of activity. And the second child popped into the universe exactly within a half an hour of his dad leaving. Now, that lad is 49 in October. He was born 3 weeks early. And I remember coming out of the delivery. Well, we never made the delivery room. We were still in the case room. And saying, just grinning ear to ear and thinking, we could have a baby this way. If this is as easy as it is, we have one every day. Because it was that incredible rush.
Right.
of birthing this child.
Mm.
But so yes, it is incredible if indeed one is fully conscious and
Right.
aware of what's going on.
Right.
It's quite amazing. And maybe being fully conscious of the birthing of the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what we're trying to be, Marisa.
Yes. Yes. And to recognize that she
Yeah.
will be born, even if we are not conscious, we may need to be held and dragged
Yeah.
and midwifed through. And
Yeah.
sometimes, we as birthing beings are the
Yeah.
agents, who
Right.
is fully sovereign in that. And
Yeah.
other times we need to be held like children as
Yeah.
we birth through, and encircled by, goddess willing, the number of wise women who can hold us in that space, because the
Yeah.
nature of birth is always going to be so varied and have so many
Yes.
different stories, sensations,
Yeah.
traumas,
Mhm.
exaltations attached
Right.
to it.
Yeah, and it's so very, very different, one generation of women to another. I
Mhm.
was in hospital 3 days. You were probably in one day. My mother was in 10.
Well, I gave birth at home, so I never
Oh,
had to leave.
exactly. You gave birth at home. I
And the
forgot that
midwives
bit.
would come to us so us not to leave they did not want me to
Right.
leave the house for 2 weeks. They did home visits for the first 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that there's a metaphor in that as well.
Mhm.
For my mom, who when I was born left 3 little boys at home.
Mhm.
Dad looked after his sons for that period for while she was in on bed rest
Yeah.
in the city, because the hospital was 50 miles away
Mm.
by Model T car. And in May they would have had to go across the river, and it might have been, if the ice was out, they might have gotten across. If it wasn't, they might have had to. They're not just too sure how they would have gotten across.
Mm.
So there's 100 years difference between that 1946, well, not 100 years, that birth, the birth of my children in the 70s, and your children in the 2010s.
Yeah, 09 and 13. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, look at what's going on with the birthing of the world, if you will.
Mhm. Right.
Are we birthing the next, I don't know, the next evolution of the planet? Who knows what it's going to look like? And we never know what that baby's going to look like, or what that baby's
Mm.
going to grow up to do either.
What strikes me is that we are doing it unevenly,
Very
because,
unevenly.
right, I think about my absolute blessed situation, so supported, so protected. I think about, maternal mortality rates for African American women, and how staggeringly, terrifyingly high they are, and how poorly
Yeah.
served they am. And I, as an educated white woman, was given every opportunity
Yeah.
to have every choice under the sun for how I wanted to
Right.
birth my babies. And
Right.
so it feels like, you mentioned that sense of like consciously birthing the divine feminine, that I think we have to hold on to that. We speak in these collective terms because we know that we are
Yeah.
in a great, moment of communal shift, and the individual shreds and shards and threads of
Yeah.
stories are so very different. And how, I guess, we're called to say, how can we care for one another to
Yeah.
elevate everyone's experience?
Yeah.
And that feels like it's part of the work of and the gift of the mother, to hold us in our
Yeah.
struggle and in
To
our
hold
unevenness, to help
and
support us in that.
right. And for all those wise women, or the wisdom of the earth to be present with us through this next, who knows, next 100 years, next 20 years, I don't know, but through the changes that are occurring, that will occur, and that have occurred. And it's a pretty profound change, I think, that's happening across the world. And you're right, as privileged women, it behooves us to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another episode of Dreams, Sovereignty, and Wise Women Ways. Thank you so much for listening. We invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. That's at Marisa Goudy over on YouTube. And also look for our websites. Pearl can be found at dreamsalongtheway.com, and I can be found at marisagoudy.com. See you next time.